USS Lexington, nicknamed the Blue Ghost, is an Essex-class aircraft carrier built during World War II for the United States Navy. Originally intended to be named Cabot, word arrived during construction that the USS Lexington had been lost in the Battle of the Coral Sea. She was renamed while under construction to commemorate the earlier ship. She was the fifth U.S. Navy ship to bear the name in honor of the Revolutionary War Battle of Lexington. Lexington was commissioned in February 1943 and saw extensive service through the Pacific War. For much of her service, she acted as the flagship for Admiral Mark Mitcher, and led the fast carrier task force through the battles across the Pacific. She was the recipient of 11 battle stars and the Presidential Unit Citation. Following the war, Lexington was decommissioned, but was modernized and reactivated in the early 1950s, being reclassified as an attack carrier. Later, she was reclassified as an anti-submarine carrier. In her second career, she operated both in the Atlantic, Mediterranean and the Pacific, but spent most of her time, nearly 30 years, on the East Coast as a training carrier. Lexington was decommissioned in 1991, with an active service life longer than any other Essex-class ship. Following her decommissioning, she was donated for use as a museum ship in Corpus Christi, Texas. In 2003, Lexington was designated a National Historic Landmark, though her surviving sister ships Yorktown, Intrepid, and Hornet carry lower hull numbers. Lexington was laid down and commissioned earlier, making Lexington the oldest remaining fleet carrier in the world. Construction and commissioning. The ship was laid down as Cabot on 15 July 1941 by Bethlehem Steel Co., Quincy, Massachusetts. In May 1942, USS Lexington, which had been built in the same shipyard 2 decades earlier, was sunk at the Battle of the Coral Sea. In June, workers at the shipyard submitted a request to Navy Secretary Frank Knox to change the name of the carrier currently under construction to Lexington. Knox agreed to the proposal and Cabot was renamed as the fifth USS Lexington on 16 June 1942. She was launched on 23 September 1942. Sponsored by Mrs. Theodore Douglas Robinson. Lexington was commissioned on 17 February 1943, with Captain Felix Stump USN in command. The Blue Ghost. The Japanese referred to Lexington as a ghost ship for her tendency to reappear after reportedly being sunk. This, coupled with the ship's dark blue camouflage scheme, led the crew to refer to her as the Blue Ghost. There were rumors during the war that the ship was so badly damaged it had to be scuttled at one point, but a newly built aircraft carrier was immediately deployed with the same name in an effort to demoralize the Japanese. Service history. World War II. After a shakedown cruise in the Caribbean, Lexington sailed via the Panama Canal to join the Pacific Fleet. One of the carrier's first casualties was 1939 Heisman Trophy winner Niall Kinnick. During the ship's initial voyage in 1943, Kinnick and other naval flyers were conducting training flights off her deck. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat flown by Kinnick developed a serious oil leak while airborne and was unable to return to the Lexington, crashing into the sea 4 miles from the ship. Neither Kinnick nor his plane was ever recovered. Lexington arrived at Pearl Harbor on 9 August 1943 and participated in a raid on Tarawa air bases in late September, followed by a raid against Wake Island in October, before returning to Pearl Harbor to prepare for the Gilbert Islands operation. From 19 to 24 November, she made searches and flew sorties in the Marshalls, covering the landings in the Gilberts. Her aviators downed 29 enemy aircraft on 23 and 24 November. Kwajalein raid. Lexington sailed to raid Kwajalein on the 4th of December. Her morning strike destroyed the SS Maru, damaged 2 cruisers, and accounted for 30 enemy aircraft. Her gunners splashed 2 of the enemy torpedo planes that attacked at midday, but were ordered not to open fire at night as Admiral Charles Pownall, then in command, believed it would give the position away. At 19:20 that night, a major air attack began while the task force was underway off Kwajalein. At 23:22, parachute flares from Japanese planes silhouetted the carrier, and 10 minutes later she was hit by a torpedo on the starboard side, knocking out her steering gear. 9 people were killed, 2 on the fantail and 7 in the Chief Petty Officer's mess room, which was a repair party station during general quarters. 4 members of the affected repair party survived because they were sitting on a couch that apparently absorbed the shock of the explosion. Settling 5 feet by the stern, the carrier began circling to port amidst dense clouds of smoke pouring from ruptured tanks aft. To maintain watertight integrity, damage control crews were ordered to seal the damaged compartments and welded them shut, applying heavy steel plates where needed. An emergency hand-operated steering unit was quickly devised, and Lexington made Pearl Harbor for emergency repairs. Arriving on the 9th of December, she reached Bremerton, Washington on December 22 for full repairs, completed on February 20, 1944. The error in judgment concerning opening fire at night was never repeated, as their aftergun crews were ordered to open fire any time the ship came under attack. Following this attack, the ship was reported sunk by Japan's Tokyo Rose, the first of several such assertions. Battle of the Philippines. Lexington returned to Majuro in time to be present when Rear Admiral Mark Misher took command of the newly formed Task Force 58 on the 8th of March. Misher took Lexington as his flagship, and after a warm-up strike against Mill, the fast carrier task force began a series of operations against the Japanese positions in the Central Pacific. She supported Army landings at Hollandia on the 13th of April, and then raided the strong point of Truk on the 28th of April. Heavy counterattacks left Lexington untouched, her planes splashing 17 enemy fighters, but, for the second time, Japanese propaganda announced her sunk. A surprise fighter strike on Saipan on the 11th of June nearly eliminated all air opposition over the island, then battered it from the air for the next 5 days. On the 16th of June, Lexington fought off a fierce attack by Japanese torpedo bombers based on Guam, once again emerging unhurt but sunk a third time by propaganda pronouncements. As Japanese opposition to the Marianas Operation provoked the Battle of the Philippine Sea on 19-20 June, Lexington played a major role in TF-58's great victory in what was later called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, with over 300 enemy aircraft destroyed the first day, and a carrier, a tanker, and a destroyer sunk the second day. American aviators nearly knocked Japanese naval aviation out of the war, for with the planes went the trained and experienced pilots without whom Japan could not continue air warfare at sea. Using Eniwetok as her base, Lexington sent aircraft on sorties over Guam and against the Palaus and Bonins into August. She arrived in the Carolinas on the 7th of September for 3 days of strikes against Japanola. Then began attacks on Mindanao, the Visayas, the Manila area, and shipping along the west coast of Luzon, preparing for the coming assault on Leyte. Her task force then blasted Okinawa on the 10th of October and Formosa 2 days later to destroy bases from which opposition to the Philippines campaign might be launched. she was again unscathed through the air battle fought after the Formosa assault. Battle of Leyte Gulf. Now covering the Leyte landings, Lexington's aircraft scored importantly in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the climactic American naval victory over Japan. While the carrier came under constant enemy attack in the engagement, her aircraft assisted in sinking Musashi and scored hits on 3 cruisers on the 24th of October. Next day, with Essex aircraft, they sank Chitos, and alone sank Zuikaku. Later in the day, they aided in sinking Zuiho. As the retiring Japanese were pursued, her aircraft then sank Nachi with 4 torpedo hits on the 5th of November off Luzon. Later that day, Lexington was introduced to the kamikaze as a flaming Japanese aircraft crashed near her island, destroying most of the island structure and spraying fire in all directions. Within 20 minutes major blazes were under control, and she was able to continue normal flight actions, as well as shooting down a kamikaze heading for Ticonderoga. On the 9th of November, Lexington arrived in Ulithi to repair battle damage while hearing that Tokyo once again claimed her sunk. Casualties were considered light despite the island structure's destruction. Chosen as the flagship for Task Group 58.2 on the 11th of December, she struck at the airfields of Luzon and Formosa during the first 9 days of January 1945, encountering little enemy opposition. The task force then entered the South China Sea to strike enemy shipping and air installations. Strikes were flown against Saipan, Cam Bay and then Indochina, Hong Kong, the Pescadores, and Formosa. Task force planes sank 4 merchant ships and 4 escorts in one convoy and destroyed at least 12 in another at Cam Bay on the 12th of January. Leaving the China Sea on the 20th of January, Lexington sailed north to strike Formosa again on the 21st of January and Okinawa again on the 22nd of January. After replenishing at Ulithi, TG 58.2 sailed on the 10th of February to hit airfields near Tokyo on the 16th of February 1945, and on the 17th of February to minimize opposition to the Iwo Jima landings on the 19th of February. Lexington flew close support for the assaulting troops from 19 to 22 February, then sailed for further strikes against the Japanese home islands and the Nansei Shoto before heading for overhaul at Puget Sound. Rear Admiral Sprague's task force. Lexington was combat-bound again on the 22nd of May, sailing via Alameda and Pearl Harbor for San Pedro Bay, Leyte, where she joined Rear Admiral Thomas L. Sprague's task force for the final round of air strikes which battered the Japanese home islands from July 15 August, when the last strike was ordered to jettison its bombs and return to Lexington on receiving word of Japanese surrender. During this period she had launched attacks on Hoshi and Hokkaido airfields, and Yokosuka and Kure naval bases to destroy the remnants of the Japanese fleet. She had also flown bombing attacks on industrial targets in the Tokyo area. After hostilities ended, her aircraft continued to fly air patrols over Japan, and dropped supplies to prisoner-of-war camps on Honshu. In December, she was used to ferry home servicemen in what was known as Operation Magic Carpet, arriving in San Francisco on the 16th of December. Post-war Lexington was decommissioned at Bremerton, Washington on the 23rd of April 1947 and entered the National Defense Reserve Fleet. While in reserve, she was designated attack carrier CV-16 on the 1st of October 1952. In September 1953, Lexington entered the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. She received the Essex-class SCB-27C and SCB-125 conversions in one refit, being then able to operate the most modern jet aircraft. The most visible distinguishing features were an angled flight deck, steam catapults, a new island, and the hurricane bow. Lexington was recommissioned on 15 August 1955, Captain A.S. Hayward, Jr. in command. Assigned San Diego as her home port, she operated off California until May 1956, sailing then for a 6-month deployment with the 7th Fleet. She based on Yokosuka for exercises, maneuvers, and search and rescue missions off the coast of China, and called at major Far Eastern ports until returning San Diego on 20 December. She next trained Air Group 12, which deployed with her on the next 7th Fleet deployment. Arriving Yokosuka on 1 June 1957, Lexington embarked Rear Admiral H.D. Riley, Commander Carrier Division 1, and sailed as his flagship until returning San Diego on 17 October 1958. Taiwan Strait crisis. Following overhaul at Bremerton, her refresher training was interrupted by the Second Taiwan Strait crisis on 14 July 1958. She was ordered to embark Air Group 21 at San Francisco and sail to reinforce the 7th Fleet off Taiwan, arriving on station on 7 August and returning San Diego on 19 December. Now the first carrier whose planes were armed with a GM-12 Bullpup guided missile. Lexington left San Francisco on 26 April 1959 for another tour of duty with the 7th Fleet. She was on standby alert during the Laotian crisis of late August and September. Following this, she exercised with British naval forces before returning to San Diego, arriving on 2 December. In early 1960, she underwent an overhaul at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. Far East. Lexington's next Far Eastern tour began late in 1960, and was extended well into 1961 by renewed tension in Laos. Returning to West Coast operations, she was ordered in January 1962 to prepare to relieve Antietam's aviation training carrier in the Gulf of Mexico, and she was redesignated CV-16 on 1 October 1962. However, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, she resumed duty as an attack carrier, and it was not until 29 December 1962 that she relieved Antietam at Pensacola, Florida. Training carrier. Into 1969, Lexington operated out of her home port, Pensacola, as well as Corpus Christi and New Orleans, qualifying student aviators and maintaining the high state of training of both active duty and reserve naval aviators. Her work became of increasing significance as she prepared the men vital to the Navy and Marine Corps operations over Vietnam, where naval aviation played a major role. Lexington marked her 200,000th arrested landing on 17 October 1967, and was redesignated CV-16 on 1 January 1969. She continued as a training carrier for the next 22 years until decommissioned and struck on 8 November 1991. In 1980, Lexington became the first aircraft carrier in U.S. naval history to have women stationed aboard as crew members. On 29 October 1989, a student naval aviator lost control of his T-2 training aircraft after an aborted attempt to land on Lexington's flight deck. The aircraft impacted the island with its right wing, killing 4 crew members and 1 civilian maintenance worker and injuring 17. The island suffered no major damage, and fires from the burning fuel were extinguished within 15 minutes. Lexington was the final Essex-class carrier in commission, after Oriskany had been decommissioned in 1976. USS Lexington Museum. On 15 June 1992, the ship was donated as a museum and now operates as the USS Lexington Museum on the bay at 27 degrees 48'53" N, 97 degrees 23'19", 2914 North Shoreline Boulevard, Corpus Christi, Texas. A megatheater was added in the forward aircraft elevator space. Lexington was designated a National Historic Landmark in 2003. The ship is carefully maintained, and areas of the ship previously off-limits are becoming open to the public every few years. One of the most recent examples is the catapult room. The ship's World War II-era gun battery is also being partially restored using guns salvaged from scrapped ships. Most notable among these are 5 38 DP gun turrets saved from the scrapping of the heavy Creuse at Des Moines. They have been mounted in the approximate locations where similar mounts once existed as part of the ship's original World War II-era fit. On 5 February 2010, the USS Lexington hosted the 17th annual Stage Door Canteen. The National Naval Aviation Museum at Naval Air Station Pensacola has a small carrier deck mock-up, whose flight deck is constructed from deck boards salvaged from Lexington. Popular culture. In 1975 and 1987, Lexington, with the blessing and cooperation of the Navy, served as a filming location at sea. The films were the feature movie Midway and the TV miniseries War and Remembrance. In both cases, she was altered to the extent possible to resemble other vessels, Enterprise and Yorktown, by adding anti-aircraft cannons and operating World War II vintage Navy aircraft. Lexington was also used for filming of the 2001 film Pearl Harbor, where she was altered to resemble a Japanese carrier as well as Hornet. In July 2007, the popular TV show Ghost Hunters filmed aboard the USS Lexington looking for evidence of ghosts, and in December 2009 was the subject of an episode of Ghost Lab on the Discovery Channel. In 2014, Pepsi used the ship to film a commercial in preparation for the 2015 Super Bowl. The commercial, titled Operation Halftime, featured country music singer Blake Shelton performing for veterans and their families. Awards. A crew of Lexington received the Presidential Unit Citation for heroism in action against enemy Japanese forces. 11 battle stars for major engagements during World War II service, and other awards.